this reflection and action planning is kind of situated in this like what, so what, now what that we used in last session that was used for the data dive. And so this page is really the now what. The so what where you make meaning that was in the preceding that's in the preceding tables. And one thing I want to name that when I look at this, it's so like Calliope, your examples were awesome in that you had data that informed student level stuff, right? And then data that informed program level stuff and site level changes. I think, without really spending some time with it, that this is grounded in program level changes. That there's kind of an assumption in how these are built, and so I just want to name that. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, but I feel like it is. It's kind of at the program level scale. And so as always, if when we're working through this, if it doesn't meet your needs, adjust it, right? Like it's just a scaffold. You can change it as needed. So but let me just talk you through really quickly what this is. You might have seen these before from the self-evaluation tools. Um, Essentially, you have a objective, something you want to do that came from meaning making, and we'll talk through where we get those meanings from. But it's based in your assets, and then we really want you to think critically around some of the contextual factors, which is the third row in there. And then ultimately just bucket that into some actions to make some concrete changes in your program. Um, so I'm gonna go to the next slide unless someone's like, ho, 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 what does that mean? Right? I'm gonna presume that that's pretty self-explanatory. Um, so we're gonna have some time to work through that. Can you actually put the slide back up? Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Libby, for managing all this back and forth. I know it's a lot. Appreciate it. So we're gonna have three possibilities for each person here. In the first, we're going to work through that reflection and action planning with the data from the high school leader project that was reviewed last month. Um, and that would be staying in the main room. So this is, hey, I don't really feel like I have some data that I want to bring. Um, or I don't want to think big. I want like and just kind of problem solve some stuff, which would be another room. I want to work through the data set that you all have shared previously. That would be staying in the main room. Second option would be to discuss challenges and opportunities of doing action planning. This kind of like a meta or scale, just for your outdoor school programs, including building a culture of feedback. So it'd be the first breakout room. And so let's just kind of talk about this process. Um, and then the second breakout room would be quiet time working specifically on your project with data that you have. And so some sort of reflection and action plan for your program. Presumably you have some data. It doesn't have to be formal data. It doesn't have to be, this way or that way. As Libby described in the beginning, data can be lots of different things. Information is maybe a better way to think about it.
The link that we previously shared in the chat takes you to a blank copy of the project plan workbook, but we're going to operate from a project plan workbook that has been partially filled out, thanks to Deborah. What you'll notice is that on page 13, Deborah has summarized some of the meaning making that we did around the high school leader listening sessions. So if you recall, for those of you who weren't here last time, Elliot and Grace and Deborah facilitated listening sessions with high school leaders across the state. We took copious notes of all the things that the students and program leaders said during those focus groups. And then we put them through two iterative processes of like collaborative meaning making, which Deborah calls a data dive. So the first data dive was with you all in this eval for learning session. Another one was done with ODS team staff. And Deborah has synthesized that into some areas for improvement, assets that were identified, challenges that were identified, and priorities that were identified. What I'm going to suggest we do first is spend a couple of minutes reading that table. So reading 13 and 14 before working together to develop an action plan around that synthesized content. Does that make sense for you all? So we're going to scroll down in that document to the next page where the action plan structure, the action plan template allows you to expand on 2 different objectives. So in our small group discussion today, I wanted to see if there were any objectives that stood out to you as things that felt manageable, things that felt concrete enough that you can see a couple of steps forward. Well, that seems like a great objective. What do we feel like are the assets and strengths that we have already? We can kind of census the things we already do that are working well. I love that. And what that does is identifies like an avenue or a crack in the door, right? Where we have this like toe in because the community of practice exists. So instead of skywriting whatever we decide, we might use the community of practice as a way to get that out. Any other assets we want to identify?
One that I'm thinking about, and I realize it's actually very complicated and this is going to make it sound easy, but like outdoor school providers are creating the schedule. So like you have power over the schedule. And I do recognize that there are many, many competing constraints and things pushing on that schedule. But like there is a locus of control around what that schedule looks like. That seems like an asset.
Well, I think we get the idea here. And since this is just a simulation, let's move down to the factors that are relevant. I think this one's really interesting. So what are some of the social, political, historical, or historicity perspectives that might be relevant to this objective and to the people we're working with? And that might stem from, if we were to try to go like deeper into the socio-cultural aspect of that, that might stem from the idea that spending time in nature is seen as recreational rather than like fundamental to our being.
Another thing I'm thinking about, because it did come up a lot in the high school student leaders' responses, was like, especially high school students of color, like very aware that these are really white spaces often that they would be going into. And there's its own level of stress and microaggression and all of these things associated with that this idea of the like hustle or grind is building on top of. And so there's so many different ways that different students are kind of starting from different levels, that then not having that time maybe means more or less to different students.
Yeah. It's kind of doubling down on white supremacist culture in that space. I love that. we don't have a lot more time, so maybe we could just brainstorm a couple of actions that we could take. Keeping in mind that the ODS team would love to hear what you think the actions might need to be.
Awesome. Welcome back, other breakout room. Happy to have you back. We had a really interesting conversation about high school leaders here in the main room. So we wanted to just give about 5 minutes for a share it or debrief. Of course, none of us were able to be in both places at once. So if there are any sort of hanging thoughts or ahas, reflections, ideas for moving forward, or questions that came out of those breakout groups, we wanted to make some space for those. So curious to sort of hear how it went within the breakout group, and maybe somebody from the main room would be willing to share a bit of our conversation.
So we looked at some of the recommendations that came out of the high school leader listening sessions, and some of the things that we could potentially prioritize that came out of our data dives. I'll share real quickly what we had. It was great. What I particularly enjoyed was looking at redefining quality. If we were to really zero in on increasing the time students have for self-care during high school leadership programs, then that might mean that we start to question the grind culture, the influence of capitalist culture on our communities, the perception that outdoor activities are purely recreational or leisure. And a really great idea that was brought up is that high school leaders were very aware of it being a white space, and that this hustle or grind or constant activity, high expectations might be kind of doubling down on the influence of white supremacist culture. And that was such a rich conversation that we didn't get very far with action planning, but we did had a couple of good ones, and I wish we had more time.
We talked about many things related to getting data that could support action planning. We kind of focused in on chaperones and getting, let's say, information from chaperones. We spent some time with some ideas for ways to get information that was responsive to context, recognizing that giving a survey to chaperones at the end of the week might miss really important information that needed to happen right then and there, and might also allow, if we didn't structure that information gathering the right way, might get things like, it was cold, my feet hurt, or, I didn't like the food, when that is important to know the quality of their experience because it's there, right? We want, equity to be in motion. We want to be inclusive to all folks, and recognize that our number one is this is programming for kids. And so holding that tension. We said that one way would be to structure conversations or like a listening session with chaperones on a regular basis, daily, if you will, during some like campfire when they're not occupied, that has a structure that would allow for some action planning, whether it be quick or at like a week-long scale. And so it's like, what went well, what's immediate student needs do we have, and what could change in the program. And so that would allow something like, that, hey, this kid's having a big need right now, we need to take care of that. Or, hey, this is not working for me. I feel like, the grind culture is happening to me too here as a chaperone, and how to be responsive to that. And so, and then how that could also scale if good notes were taking, meaning was made well, such that, the program coordinator or lead teacher might not be there. But then if those things were recorded, and then would allow someone to look at it from week to week to week, and that would be a way to have, some kind of big, oh, I need to adjust the program this way, as opposed to something that's kind of reactive. So, and then finally, framing evaluation as a reflective activity, not a tag on at the very end, right? How do we link this awesome experience and reflect on it and celebrate it, as opposed to, hey, do the survey. Or, oh, you have to do the survey, right? And really just shifting that frame and all of us seeing it as such and presenting it as reflection as a critical part of learning.
And we always appreciate folks taking the time to learn and share and grow with us. So thank you for being here. Thank you again, Calliope, for sharing about your work. You are all welcome to contact us anytime. Our emails are here